So if it starts to become crowded, that's when I find it's time to look for something else. When everyone is doing one thing, I want to try to see what's on the other side.
Were you ever wrong?
I was wrong about Bitcoin. I think SaaS is a great model. That doesn't mean it's the right model for everything. There's a growing dissatisfaction with having everything as a subscription. Working at a small company is really good for the soul. Some of the most enjoyable moments I have at work is when I collaborate with others.
In today's episode, we're talking with David Heinemeier Hansson, also known as DHH. He's the creator of the award-winning framework Ruby on Rails, as well as the co-founder of Basecamp, a company that he scaled to a multi-million-dollar business. He even won Le Mans along the way. He did it all by prioritizing profitability over investments, doing it his own way. Let's get started. By the way, this podcast is powered by our own ScaleUp, Infobeep, that makes it easier for you to message your own customers via WhatsApp, SMS, or Apple Messages. More on that later.
Hi, David. Thank you for joining us. Well, my first question is actually maybe a comment because I follow your work, your Twitter, your books, your blog for years. And I always feel like with you, it's like always the opposite day. Let's do everything different than the current stream. So let's bootstrap, let's don't sell software as a service, sell it as a product, etc., etc. And I wanted to ask you how hard it is to swim against the current constantly, and what are the biggest advantages you saw?
Well, I think first of all, you get used to it if you keep doing it. So we've been doing that for well over 20 years. We've been running Basecamp as a SaaS product for 20 years. Back when that got started, convincing people to put their credit card in online was actually a thing. Like no one thinks twice about that. You had to build up trust. We had to build up first trust with the bank. The bank wouldn't even allow us to have a merchant account that charged for year-long subscriptions. That's how we ended up with monthly subscriptions in the original case. And then you have to build trust up with potential customers. And that's really a strategy that we've used the entire duration we've had our company, is to build trust by sharing interesting things, creating connections with people, and building a rapport such that someone might not buy from you because they read one blog post or even one book, but maybe if they read 2 books and 10 podcasts and blog posts and whatever, they develop a trust. And they go, okay, now I'm in the market for, say, a project management tool. I should look at Basecamp. Basecamp, oh yeah, that's the thing that these guys I follow do. So building up that level of trust, I think really helps just make it easier to swim against the current like that, because when you do, you are often surprising people in a way where they go like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And if you don't have the trust, it's very easy to just miss it. It's very easy to say, well, that's just some crazy kook on the internet. But if you have built up trust, they might give you a second chance. They might go like, huh, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, you mean like not doing SaaS, buying a product? That's interesting, that's different. And I also just think, to me, that's what's interesting. I don't want to do what everyone has already done. That market is saturated in many cases. If I'm just going to do a copy of someone else, that doesn't inspire me creatively. So I often look at it as both a market opportunity and as an interesting thing to do. If everyone is doing something, I always get suspicious. So if we're all going in on the cloud, if everything is being sold as SaaS, I go like, I think something smells here. There's room for something else. There's no way that any one strategy is the right thing for everyone. So if it starts to become crowded, that's when I find it's time to look for something else.
Were you ever wrong?
Oh, we've been wrong countless times. I mean, we've had wrong timing. We had essentially Slack in 2005 with Campfire. And you look at what Slack became now, and some entrepreneurs do this, oh, I had this idea, and like, why did my thing take off? I don't spend any time on that. Success is a combination of both talent and timing. And timing is another word for luck. We were just not at the right time. And someone else went, wonderful, that's great. But our chat product that we launched in 2005 did not have anywhere near the success because the time was not right. Companies were not interested in chatting as a main form of communication in 2005. Phones still dominated, all these other things. And then by the time Slack came around, they were ready. And wonderful, it was a great product, it was good timing. You can look at those things and go like, that's great. I was wrong, like, we were not at the right time. I've had other famous, I was about to say gaffes, that's not what it is, just mistakes. I thought Facebook wasn't going to be a big thing. And I wrote a big famous blog post, at least at the time, saying Facebook is not worth $33 billion. Of course, they turned out to be worth far more than that.
It's not.
And some of that comes from if you try to analyze the present and make predictions about the future, you will eventually be wrong. And usually it doesn't take more than 5 minutes because no one can tell the future. And people are wrong all the time. VCs are wrong about what companies are going to turn into success. They actually even make a business model being wrong 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they just need that 1 out of 10 to be a slam dunk hit to win. So they're like, yeah, we'll be wrong 9 out of 10 times. I try to have a slightly better batting average than being wrong 9 out of 10 times. I'd like to have, maybe I'm wrong 3 out of 10 times or 2 out of 10 times. But yeah, I think if you do stuff, if you interact with reality and the market and so forth, you're not going to be right all the time.
Yeah.
And you have to train yourself to accept that that's part of the process. If you never want to be wrong, well, you know what? You can get that. You can never be wrong. Just don't ever say anything. Don't ever try anything. But also, what way of that is that to live?
Aren't you afraid that you're going to break trust if you make mistakes, if you predict something that doesn't happen?
No, so do you know what's interesting? I've actually found the opposite is true. The times where I've created the most trust actually is when I admit to mistakes.
Oh, okay.
I had a case of this with Bitcoin. I have been very critical about Bitcoin and crypto in general for basically the whole duration of that endeavor. And then I had a moment or an observation that changed things for me when the Canadian trucker protest happened during COVID. And the government started freezing people's bank accounts, not just the people who were protesting, but people who donated to protesters. I went, do you know what? I hadn't seen that coming. I thought Canada is like a liberal democracy. I didn't think that those kind of authoritarian measures were something that was even in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And then I looked, do you know what? I can see the utility of Bitcoin now in a very different way. I think this is one of the same way where national characters build up. Why are the Germans so afraid of inflation? Well, do you know what? There's historic memory of living through hyperinflation. Mm-hmm. When you've been exposed to governments seizing bank accounts and so forth, do you know what? Maybe you care a little bit more about custodial property of digital currency. So I changed my mind on that. And I wrote a blog post basically saying I was wrong about Bitcoin. And it turned out to be a very, I don't know if I want to say healing, but trust creating event. Because I think deep down people know that no one's right all the time, that we all make mistakes, but that it's quite difficult to own up to it.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to accept that you did make a mistake, account for why it was a mistake, and share what you've learned, because there's a vulnerability in that. And I've found that the handful of times where I've made a big U-turn on something, it's almost always been positive. Where it goes wrong is when people try to save face, when they make mistakes, and then they don't want to own up to it. And then comes the excuses, then comes the bullshit, then comes the insincerity. And that's the kind of stuff that destroys trust. It's actually not the mistake itself. Now, at some point, if all you do is mistakes,
Yeah, of course.
then that's not going to work, right? But if there's a mix and you have some things that work and some things that people respond to, and you have some things that doesn't work, I think it actually makes you more human. And I think we have a much easier time creating trust with other humans, not robots, not perfect manicured pictures of someone who just calls all the shots correctly. That's not actually very relatable. And I think that being relatable, by being human, by making mistakes and owning up to them, is part of a way to build trust, which to me is an extension of building brand, which to me is an extension of marketing in general. I consider all of my writings as a form of marketing. I don't do them as marketing. And I think that's why they work, in part. Because I do them because I actually believe. I pursue opportunities because I actually believe that those are better. We left the cloud because I actually thought it was better. It was not a gambit. It was not a marketing stunt. It was, I analyze things from first principles and arrive at some conclusions. Then I try to follow those conclusions wherever they may lead. I do look for potential avenues. When everyone is doing one thing, I want to try to see what's on the other side. I think that's just the zig when everyone else is zacking. It's just a time-proven principle of looking for things. That doesn't mean you're always right. Sometimes you'll find out, oh, there's a reason why everyone is doing it that way, because it's just better. But what I also find is that something can be just better for a period of time. And then companies and individuals don't realize when that time has passed. So being capable of constantly revisiting your priors, constantly re-examining your conclusions and realizing, you know what, I thought this was right, but that was 5 years ago. What's the half-life of truth? Like, when does something goes from being true, absolutely correct, to not true and not correct? It happens all the time, especially in technology, and oftentimes it sneaks up on you. That you realize, cloud, for example. A lot of people made an analysis, say in 2015, 16, cloud is the future, because it was based on analysis of what things cost and how they worked in 2015. They never went back to that conclusion and questioned, actually, is cloud still the right thing, 2024? And I think unless you do, you're going to miss the time when the truth is no longer true, when the half-life has set in. And that's just bad. That's bad for the world, it's bad for the markets, it's bad for companies. It's how companies go out of business all the time. They believe something to be true that's no longer so. There's this, I forget who it was, the famous quote, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know that isn't so.
Mm-hmm. One thing that companies also, or scale-ups, or founders of scale-ups think that's true is as they grow their companies, the companies need to grow in terms of people, processes, they need to grow more complex. In your panel now at South by Southwest, you said like complexity is the killer of most companies. Now that was on another topic, but do you think that rings true also for like scaling businesses, growing them? You also made a point of saying like leave growth at the table in one of your blog posts. How do you think of keeping companies simple?
Yeah, to me, complexity is the root of most evil when it comes to companies. They end up with too many people that they don't need, pursuing projects that aren't that valuable. And some of it is the reward. Something worked. Because if nothing worked, you were not going to have that opportunity. But something worked, and you got to a place where suddenly you could expand. And what a lot of founders, I think, don't realize is sometimes you can also just stick with what works. And that can grow much bigger, even within the confines of what you already have, than you have any imagination. We were, at our company, when we were 20 people, we were making tens of millions of dollars of subscription revenues, because there's not in technology, certainly in programming and software, a one-to-one relationship where, to make another $1 million, you got to hire 10 more people. Like, it's not that connected. And I think we have plenty of outside examples of that really nails the point. WhatsApp, when they sold to Facebook for 19 million, I think they had 35 engineers or 45 engineers, something like that. And you go, here's a piece of software that was at the time, I think, used by 400 million people. 35 engineers or 40 engineers, whatever, less than 100 engineers, 400 million users. Most companies would think, if you have 400 million users, you're going to need hundreds of people, if not thousands of people. And they proved, no. Instagram was another famous example. I think they sold to also Facebook, when they were 9 people, right?
Yeah.
So we need these reminders of what's possible with technology to sort of set the horizon. And we try at our company to go, you know what, first of all, I just personally don't want to run a large company. I don't enjoy large companies because they do have a tendency to gravitate towards complexity. You get multiple layers and reporting chains and processes and all this stuff that I don't like. I like creating products, I like moving fast, I like working with small teams of people. That's difficult in a large company. Some companies do it well, and there are strategies to do it, but a lot of companies don't do it well. And once you divorce these two things, that like your outcome, your growth potential, is not determined solely or even majorly by the headcount that you have when you're dealing with technology, I think it really sets you free to experiment with different ways of building companies. And I think a lot of companies could be far more efficient, enjoyable, profitable, if they simply didn't get ahead of their skis. If they just realized, you know what, this is working. We don't have to expand. Growth is not an automatic consequence of growth in terms of headcount or company size, of growth in business. You can actually think like, how can we make our processes or our help system or our software simpler so we need fewer people to help other people? Do we even need sales and marketing? Can we do things in a different way? There are all these different tactics you can consider if you get it out of your head that having a large company is valuable in and of itself. Like to me, having a high head count is perhaps a necessity for some companies, but it's also a bit of a failure state. It meant that we didn't build a more efficient, more intuitive piece of software. And then I remind myself, yeah, do you know what? WhatsApp had 400 million people with 35 folks on staff. Whatever trouble we're dealing with, there is a path out of this that does not require us to hire a ton more people. Now, again, that doesn't mean hiring people is bad. It just means that there's a bunch of lethargic startups and scale-ups that grow way too fast, in part because they raise a bunch of money and they have a deadline by which to spend it, usually 18 months, because then they have to raise the next round. And that's just how the mechanics of the venture capital game work.
Yeah.
It's the default. And that default, in my opinion, is not right for most companies. There's a small subset of companies that are in winner-take-all markets, viral markets, where things really do have to go to the moon right away or they're not going to work. And then there's a much larger group of companies where you don't need to have that scale. You don't need to even have that pace. Like, we didn't grow that quickly, but we stuck with it. And after 20 years of running a profitable software company, do you know what? That's also a very fine way to build a fortune.
And what do you think about the exact opposite? There's this trend of like indie hackers,
Yes.
solopreneurs who have maybe taken it to the other extreme where
Yes.
I don't need any people.
Right.
I'm good myself. What do you think of that
And they
kind
usually
of approach?
burn out.
And they sometimes, yeah, they burn out.
Sometimes.
What do you
Yeah.
think about that approach?
It doesn't appeal to me so much because some of the most enjoyable moments I have at work is when I collaborate with others. Now, I also like my alone time, but I wouldn't like just that. I like a bit of a mix, and I think I have absolutely a bias towards small companies, but I wouldn't personally enjoy the single entrepreneurship thing. But sometimes that's how things start, right? So they start as a single entrepreneur, and then if you find something that works, you are able to build it. So I like the scrappiness. I like the zero risk aspect of it. All you need is time. Now, if you had an opportunity to work for someone else and build up a bit for the next stage, maybe you're giving yourself like, I have 3 months, I have 6 months, I can work on something, I can try an idea. Even if it doesn't work, you're gonna learn a lot. Even if you're not gonna actually become an entrepreneur, you can become a far better employee. Like, you will actually have seen what does it take to build a business? What does it take to get something from nothing to something? That's quite difficult. And I think a lot of people who just hop from established company to established company have very little appreciation for what it takes to go from nothing to something. So I think it's a positive trend. I think it can become perhaps a little bit too much of an aesthetic. It often tracks with nomad culture as well.
Yeah, it's a bit fetishized to a point.
Yeah, it is. And for some people, I'm sure that's lovely. For me, if I live out of a hotel for even like 2 weeks, I'm about to go nuts. Like, I can't, that's not what responds to me. So I also don't want that to become the new stereotype, that the way to be an entrepreneur in 2024 is to be a digital nomad, traveling to all sorts of exotic destinations, constantly moving around while you're on your laptop building a whole business by yourself. Because it also sets a somewhat limited scope for that kind of businesses. There's a lot of drop ship stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things like, what can you actually do with a single individual? I think you can do an awful lot. So I think but you can't do it all. There are limits to what you're capable of doing as a single individual. And like, let's not pigeonhole that like that's the idealized state of entrepreneurship. It's great to start that way. But I think for the betterment of everyone, few people are actually cut out to be entrepreneurs. And the way we have a healthy working society is that some of those entrepreneurs build businesses that hire other people. Now, I'd like to see more businesses that aren't mega businesses. I actually believe, try to run a company in the spirit that working at a small company is really good for the soul, both for the person who owns the company and for the people who are employed there. And there's a intimacy that's really just human. And we lose some of that as companies grow and you don't know everyone's name and all the other things that come with that. Sometimes like, you can only build Tesla if you have tens of thousands of people. That's just the mechanics of that business. But you know what? You can build and run Basecamp with, what do we have, 65 people?
Yeah, you're under 100
We've been
people.
doing it for 20 years. We've offered great jobs to people in those 2 decades. I've enjoyed myself doing it. I think that's actually sort of the meat of what we should have, that most companies should be, let's say, between 20 and 500. That's also the case. If you look at businesses around the world, most businesses are not one person and they're not Google. They exist somewhere in the middle. And I think the healthiest economies really embrace that. Like if you look at Germany and the Mittelstand, all these family-owned businesses that part of the automotive supply chain, for example, there's a resiliency when you don't have all your eggs in like 5 big companies basket, but also not just a bunch of single entrepreneurships that will rise and fall with one individual. So I think there's so much room in the middle, and the middle is usually ignored. We focus on the outliers. We focus on those single entrepreneurs who are living a glamorous nomad lifestyle and sending pictures from Bali. And then we're focusing on the Googles and the Facebooks and the unicorns of the world, when actually 99%, they exist in this broad middle, and it's a wonderful middle. It's not a stepping stone to something else. Like, I'm not temporarily embarrassed towards having 200 employees. I like this size. This is a good size. We can stay here and make no apologies whatsoever for the fact that we aren't bigger or that we aren't smaller. So I like to contribute our example of, do you know what? Here's a mid-sized company. They're great. Most companies should be mid-sized because most opportunities are mid-sized. And most choice is available if we have mid-sized companies. If we just have 5 big companies, yeah, do you know what? That's not a lot of choice. If we just have all these single entrepreneurs, there's some hard limits on what we can enjoy. But if we focus on this broad, beautiful middle, then we can do everything.
So you said that you wouldn't ever be a solopreneur, but is there any scenario in the world where you would accept quite the opposite, VC investment, ever?
Not for software, but if I had a dream to send rockets to Mars,
Okay.
I would probably go, do you know what? I'm going to need some money.
Are there people that have those dreams?
There are
or-
people who have those dreams, and I am very thankful that they exist, even as I recognize that they are not me, and they do not have my aspirations. But you know what? The future of the human race depends on some crazy people who think they can send rockets to Mars. So there are all sorts of domains. We talked about Rimac, the car company.
Yeah.
If you want to build something in physical space that requires factories and physical materials, you're going to need money, and you're probably going to need money before you can make money. Although not in all cases. There are some wonderful examples of my favorite car company. One of my favorite car companies, Pagani. It's an Italian company that was started by essentially a solo entrepreneur who used to work for Lamborghini, putting things together. He branched out on his own as a solo entrepreneur, bought an autoclave and started making carbon fiber bits for other companies. Eventually built himself up to have enough capital that he could build his own car. Amazing story. Now runs a company of I don't know, 100 people or something like that. Makes the most beautiful, exquisite cars in the world, right? Absolutely love that. That was able to start from something like that, and I could totally see myself in that position. I don't see it as a final resting point. Like, oh, I just want to be a single entrepreneur forever. That doesn't appeal to me. I know it does to some people, and I also know why. And part of it is that they don't want to be a manager, and I have complete respect for that. I think the worst part often about running people is that people are difficult.
Yeah.
The computers are far easier, and dealing with humans in a managerial capacity is not always enjoyable. And I can see why that's attractive to some people to become a solo entrepreneur, to escape that. But I'll also say that, you know what, the costs also come with benefits. Like, your most joyous moments is sharing success with others and being part of a team that builds something and realizing, oh, do you know what, I don't know everything. This person knows a little bit, this person knows a little bit. Together we know more than any of us. So I want to push out do you know what, we should be ambitious enough that it's not all going to be solo entrepreneurs. We should try to think, you know what, it's good to supply jobs to lots of people who don't want to be an entrepreneur. That's actually a service to the world. And we can do that without chasing unicornness and all the other nonsense.
So you are a technologist. On that point, do you think that certain technologies make it easier to scale a company in terms of like choosing a specific language? I mean, a lot of companies, a lot of software service companies built their whole thing on Ruby on Rails, like you
Yes.
started Movement. What are your thoughts on that now?
I think that all complicated systems have all good complicated systems have to start from functioning small systems. And to build a small system, you need tooling that is proportionate to that. And you need tooling that can make single individuals highly productive. So I think one of the problems with the VC path, as it often is that people raise a bunch of money and then they hire in bulk. Oh, we're just going to hire 8 engineers right away. And then they pick tools that kind of work for that. And those tools are often hand-me-downs from very large companies like Facebook or Google or whatever. And they're built for a context where cost and constraint, they're not words that apply to them. No, we can just have a bigger team. We can just throw more money at it. We can just take longer time. That is not the reality of most entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs have constraints, must embrace constraints. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough people. They don't have all these things. I build software and tools for them. I build Ruby on Rails as a one-person framework, as I say. I used Ruby on Rails. I used Ruby and built Rails as part of building Basecamp as a single programmer. We were multiple people at the team, we had multiple designers, but I was the one programmer. And I wanted tools that could make a single programmer productive enough that you can build a business of it. Not all tools are built with that objective in mind. Many tools are built for very different objectives. A lot of tools that come out of, say, Facebook are built for like, oh, what's good for a team of 30 inside a corporation of 30,000? Those are different objectives. Sometimes there's overlap and we can find common ground with tools that work for both of us. Very often, what Facebook needs is literally the 100% opposite of what you need when you're just starting out. So I want to make sure that we also have, that we're building tools by smaller companies for smaller companies. That we don't all just go hand-me-downs from big companies because those tools often, they're the wrong size. They don't fit. And oftentimes, they end up just squandering resources that are scarce, that we should be using to get further, last longer. That's my allegiance. I also just find that that's, again, fun. I like to increase my own personal productivity, not just the productivity of a team. And to do that, I need to build the kind of tools that work for single individuals.
So I want to read one of your tweets. There are many of them, but I will read
60,000, in fact, I just saw, which is a horrifying number.
Congratulations. Do you know the number of blog posts you
The
wrote?
what?
Number of blog posts you wrote?
So I've just had the count I started this new Hey World blog that I've been using our own system to do. And in the last 3 years, I've written over 300 blog posts. I write a lot.
Yeah, that's great. So one tweet. The half of the joy of advocating once, opening a new mainstream viable alternative to the SaaS dominance in web software. So many ripe opportunities for turning expensive monthly services into affordable products. So you're also making a new movement, same with Ruby on Rails. And a lot of other entrepreneurs are going in the same path. But how do you scale affordable products? I mean, there is a reason why software is sold as a service for a long time.
Yes. I think SaaS is a great model for a lot of things, and it's certainly a very profitable model. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it's the right model for everything. And again, perhaps partly because I'm old enough to have lived before SaaS.
Yeah.
And
We
used
still
computers
remember.
before SaaS, when all software was sold like this. All software was sold as a one-time fee. Maybe you'd buy it again if they released a major new version. I remember our designers buying Photoshop 4, and some of them going, this is a great version of Photoshop. I don't need Photoshop 5. I can just buy it once and I can keep it. And like that model works for us. It's a great model that built all of Adobe. So Adobe, for example, I think is a wonderful example. They didn't switch to SaaS until relatively recently. They have a huge history of being a mega profitable long-term company well before SaaS. Yeah. So SaaS is by no means a requirement to building either successful or large companies. And the computing industry has decades of examples of companies who thrived selling products like that. Now, what you have to realize is it works at a certain scale. If you sell something once, you can't just have 100 customers, right? You probably need thousands of customers. Unless your one product is very, very expensive, you're probably going to need thousands of customers. Okay, so what? Build software that thousands will buy. One of my favorite examples of both a small company and selling things once and being at scale is the early video game industry.
Yeah.
Id Software released Doom as shareware. And the company had 7 employees at the time, and I think they sold 5 million copies. Yeah, they got plenty rich off that. They also got to keep the majority of the money. So there are all these opportunities, I think, for giving customers what they want. And I think that really is what drives us on fundamentally. There is a growing dissatisfaction with having everything as a subscription. There's a growing awareness that, you know what, you can really get killed by 1,000 paper cuts. Oh, they want $15 a head. They want $12 a head. And individually you look at it like, oh, it's not that much money, but you add it all up and suddenly it's all of your money.
Yeah.
And you realize, you know what, this is just not that important. If I could have just bought this tool once and used it, that was fine. The first product we've done in this once series is Campfire. It's a take on Slack. And the reason we've taken on Slack is I think Slack is one of the most absurd cases of the amount of money some companies spend on SaaS. There are companies literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and a handful of companies spending millions of dollars a year to have Slack. Slack is a commodity at this point. Chat is a commodity. It's a well-established domain. There hasn't been any material innovation in it for a long time. We should be able to have generics. Generics that are vastly cheaper than something like Slack. So that's when I get excited about opportunities. We're selling Campfire for $300. It's a chat system that for a ton of companies will be a complete replacement for Slack. And for some companies, they literally save 99.9% on their bill. That's a
lot.
degree of change that is novel. And this is, I like these things. I like where the model changes and then suddenly things that were not possible. I've been hearing from a lot of folks who run online communities, for example. They might have 4,000 people in that community. Slack has just changed their pricing so that they have to pay. They have to pay 4,000 people times $15 a month. That's not viable. That community can't actually exist under those constraints because there isn't however much money that's going to be, the $6,000, actually $60,000, sorry, $60,000 a month. This community doesn't have that. They need alternatives, right? Maybe they have $300. $300 is not that impossible to sort of set up and then run. Now you still also need to bring your server. Okay, great. That's maybe $10 a month or $20 a month. So some of these models, I think, are just ripe for competition. And I think if anything that's glorious about capitalism, it is that competition forces us to get things better, cheaper, faster. And I see SaaS as a business model being a little stale. It's being over-applied to too many domains that the value proposition actually sort of isn't there. We've just magically trained companies and consumers who are like, oh yeah, everything is a subscription. When rather, if they were given the choice, they would make a different choice. They would say, I'd prefer not to pay every month.
Yep.
I'd prefer not to pay every year. I'd prefer to pay once, own a piece of software again, like it used to be, and I can run that piece of software on whatever computer I install it on. So now, the difficult thing with something like that is, it's like what we were doing in 2004. Trying to convince customers to buy things in a new way is very difficult, and it actually takes a long time most of the time. Because once you've trained a customer base that oh, everything is a subscription, I don't need my own computer, everything runs in the cloud, they're going to believe that that's reality. And to reset reality is a bit of an uphill battle, but fortunately, it's also one of the battles I enjoy the most.
As you've just heard, communication is key, especially communication with customers. You probably have a newsletter, but what about messaging with customers over WhatsApp, Apple Messages, or even SMS? Thankfully, there's a platform. Our InfoBeep messaging platform is built for scale-ups just like yours. Companies like Uber, HubSpot, and Meta use it every day for messaging. Link in the description below.
And maybe one last question. Having in mind everything that you said, and for most scale-up founders, there will be a set of skills that, for example, VCs will expect from them, fundraising, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the key 2 or 3 skills that your type of scale-up founder needs to have? Is it writing, for example? Is it challenging principles like not hiring people? Not hiring more people?
It's a good question, and I think some of it comes down to having a set of skill in your whole leadership team. So you can be complementary. I think the reason that Jason Fried, my business partner, and I have worked so well together for 23 years now is that we have some overlapping skills. We have some things that both of us enjoy. We both enjoy writing, we both enjoy marketing, we both enjoy running the company. And then we have complementary skills. I do the technical thing, he does the design thing. So I think you need to look at like, what do we need sort of in our team to make it happen? Not necessarily just what the individual needs, but in your team, in my opinion, if you're going to be bootstrapped, you have to be able to build it yourself. That's a wall for some founders. They have ideas, but they don't have the skills to transform those ideas into products. So they need money to hire other people to do their ideas for them. I'm not saying there's something bad about that. I'm saying it's usually not compatible with bootstrapping. There's not room for just the idea person on a bootstrapping team. You have to have some actually sort of skills to make the thing happen. So being a adequate, good enough product person who can make things themselves, I think is highly important. And to realize that you also have to be the champion. Whether we call that championship marketing or sales or awareness or attention, it doesn't really matter. You need to be the #1 cheerleader. And you can't really outsource that. No one is going to care as much about your little fledgling business as you are. Of course, because you own it. It's your idea. What I often see is an eagerness from founders to get out of the roles that are actually the core requirements of being a founder, being the #1 cheerleader, building the product, being in the product. Certainly have those complementary skills. Like maybe someone on your team is the cheerleader and someone else does the whatever. It all has to be in that you can't outsource this too early. I find writing to be one of those core competency skills that have such magnifying potential. So if you can develop your writing, you have a much easier time to convince other people to buy your product, to join your company, to listen to your kooky ideas. So if you can become an effective communicator, then you have a leg up. The history of product is full of great products that were poorly communicated, poorly positioned, poorly sold, that failed. So it's not enough just to have a good product. You also need someone who can communicate why that product is needed, why it's better, why it's all those kind of things. And again, we oftentimes pigeonhole that into marketing, and then we have a stereotype in our heads about what a marketing person is. I don't think I fit that stereotype. I don't think Jason fits that stereotype, yet what we do is obviously marketing. It is obviously creating awareness for our products and our brand and our persons, and that clearly helps our business. So I think if you expand, we have an essay, I think it's in Rework, one of the books we wrote, called Marketing is Everything. And if you zoom out, like marketing is not just buying ads, it's not just coming up with clever taglines, it's customer service, for example. How you engage with customers, what do they feel after they have a bad experience? You always have the opportunity, I think there's another essay maybe in Rework, of the two coins, right? A lot of customers will take, this is the end of the world. They hit a bug and this is like, this is just terrible. You could argue with them. No, it's not terrible. You're exaggerating. It's actually no big deal. It'll just accelerate their frustration. Or you can go, yeah, this is terrible. I'm going to fix it, and you're going to be happier that you had the problem because you're going to be so satisfied about how I fixed it for you. You're going to feel such a connection that like now I'm not just buying a product, I've created a connection with someone who helped me fix something. So there are all these opportunities that to me is actually the essence of marketing. That being good at that, and it's not even being good at, this is being willing to learn. Because you know what, I wasn't great. No one is born a great anything. Everyone who's great at something had to learn it. Now, they might have had talent, and they might have had advantages in some regard, but you don't need to be the best in the world. I don't need to be the best writer in the world. I need to be a proficient, effective writer. Everyone, absolutely everyone, can become an effective writer. It may take a little longer for some than others, but you know what? As we just said, I practice that skill every day. I try to practice this every day. I write a blog post many days of the week, and not everyone's going to do that volume. But why do I do that volume? Well, first, because I want to practice it. Second, because now after doing it for 20 years, it's become easy, and it's become enjoyable. And these things often go hand in hand. You find something difficult, you don't really want to do it. You dive into it, you learn something about it, you become a little better. Oh, suddenly it's actually kind of fun. And you do it more and so forth. So it becomes this virtuous cycle. So it's not about like what are the gatekeeping things to come in. When we started working on Basecamp, I wasn't the best programmer in the world. Not that I am now, but I had no renown, right? I'd only been programming for a few years. But I went like, you know what? I'm going to learn this I'm going to become good at it by practicing and making something. Yeah, turned out pretty well. We're all going to have different paths, and not everything is going to turn out whatever. But I do think that just having that willingness to identify, this is what I need, this is what I'd like to be good at. Not everything you can force yourself. Like, I couldn't be a good cold caller. Like, that's not a skill that is available to me.
Cold emailer, though.
Or cold emailer, not even really. I think, but outside of that, you should be stretching it a little bit. You should have a little bit of discomfort. No one's great at everything starting out, especially if you're a new entrepreneur. And in fact, that's the gift. I credit a lot of our quirky products, quirky success with the fact that we did not know everything. We were not experts. When you're not experts, you also don't know where the boundaries are. You don't know where the limits are. And like sometimes that means you stumble into something that other people had discarded as impossible or impractical or inefficient. You don't know. So you end up doing it and it works. So that's why I think, the global economy works, why entrepreneurship is so important, why we have to try all these different things, because like we don't know it all. We don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. It's actually very difficult. I sometimes get entrepreneurs who are like, oh, tell me about my business idea. And I'm like, do you know what? I can't tell you whether it's a good idea or not. Because if it was a good idea, someone would already have done it. If it was obvious, Paul Graham has a good saying of this. If something was obviously good, it's actually a red flag. Because someone would already have done it if it actually was just obviously good. Or maybe actually it isn't, and you've just misanalyzed it. Most ideas that turn out to be good and big, they're counterintuitive in some way. In some way, it's not obvious at first glance why this was going to work. So I think that's the fun of it, that we don't know everything. And then we have to throw things into reality, into the market. We have to ask people to pay to get objective, truthful evaluation of our ideas, which really levels the playing field in a wide variety of ways, but also just makes it so enjoyable that it's always a new day.
Awesome. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this interview with DHH. Now go watch this episode where we interview a Wimbledon tennis player who turned ScaleUp investor.